And welcome back to episode number 25. Wow, we're already at 25, boys, of Raise the Banner podcast. I'm one of your three co-hosts, as usual. Matt Couture here with J.R. Mott, Benny Ballgame Dearth, and our special guest today, WEEI's Jon Lyons. Jon, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Not a huge snowstorm around my part, at least, that I thought we are going to have, but I'm glad I carved out the time to be on with you guys. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, same thing with the snowstorm. They called school at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and we got a grand total of nothing at my house. Luckily, I can work from home, so it wasn't a total loss, and the kids got to go to the trampoline park, get some energy out, so it's good to get out of the house. Yeah, excited to get going and see how this goes tonight.
Yeah, we basically got a wet dusting in where I'm at in North Shore. Well, obviously you are too, Ben. JR is down in Florida enjoying the nice, what was it, like mid-70s?
It was 83 today in the Orlando area. So
Nice.
It was
Nice
a little
83.
bit warm, but I don't mind the cold. I prefer the cold over the hot because it's just brutal down here when it gets really humid. You feel
Summers
like
in Florida are pretty freaking rough.
you start drowning in your own clothing. That's how much you sweat.
AC goes out and you're in big trouble. But
yeah,
all right,
during hurricane season.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, let's jump right into it. We're going to start with the Patriots to kind of connect everything together. As I hope everybody who's watching this knows, the Kansas City Chiefs won their third Super Bowl in the last 6 years.
5 years.
Correct? 5 years. 5 years. Pat Mahomes got his third. That's kind of where I want to just get into it. I'm growing increasingly, I guess, impatient with the subject, and it's getting increasingly irritating. The more, this generation of media wants to be the person to make the bold take or the first take. So, Jon, I'll start out with you. Obviously, Mahomes has his third. We all know where Brady stands with his numbers and his Super Bowls and all that. I noticed you got a nice little Brady Belichick thing in the background right there.
Yep.
Where are you standing on this whole debate? And what's your overall thoughts?
Yeah, look, I said after last year's Super Bowl win for the Chiefs that I thought Mahomes was already in that top 5 all-time territory, and I think he's there, but I think there's a huge difference from being number 1 like Brady, and I would even argue number 2 Joe Montana, to where Patrick Mahomes is right now. And if we remember, Brady wasn't fully compared to Montana until he won that 4th one in the 2014 season. Now, there were some comparisons and some similarities, but it wasn't, hey, Brady and Montana are the same in 2003 or 2004, right? We never heard that. And frankly, they weren't at that time because Brady was a good quarterback at that time who had won multiple Super Bowls. Montana had won 4 in a decade and was one of the best, at that time was the greatest of all time. So I think, look, I would put Mahomes at number 3 or 4 overall all time. I think he's that good. Just when you watch him play, he looks that good. But then the numbers, I mean, we're talking 219 touchdowns, a 103.5 quarterback rating for his career. He's got 2 MVPs already, 2-time first-team All-Pro. He's got 5,100 yards in the playoffs alone and 41 playoff touchdowns to go with 3 championships, 3-time Super Bowl MVP, and his playoff rating is actually higher than his regular season rating. So, like, the guy, just watching him and also the numbers, I think he's very deserving of being in that conversation. But again, there's a huge gap between Mahomes having a little over 28,000 yards and Brady having 89,214. Right? We're talking 60,000 yards here, guys.
Yeah.
Pretty big gap. Mahomes has 219 touchdowns. Brady has 649. Right? Mahomes has 74 wins. Brady has 251. And I know wins aren't fully a QB stat, but come on. That's a pretty big gap.
They're a QB stat when someone wants them to be a QB stat.
Yeah, like right now it fits my narrative, so it's going to be a QB stat right now. Brady has 7 Super Bowls, 3-time first team All-Pro. In the playoffs, I mentioned Mahomes has 5,100 yards. Well, you can double that, and he'd still have 3,000 less than Brady in the playoffs. Brady has 88 playoff touchdowns. I mean, a 5-time Super Bowl MVP. And let's not forget, Tom Brady beat Mahomes in an AFC championship game. Then he beat him in a Super Bowl, much like Bill Belichick, side note, beat Andy Reid in the Super Bowl and beat him in an AFC championship game. So I just think, look, I think Mahomes is in that conversation. He's on a great track. Could he maybe get to 5 or 6 Super Bowls? I think that's, without a doubt, that's possible to me. Not a guarantee, but I think it's eminently possible. But there's still a huge gap between what Brady has done and what Mahomes has done. And last point for me, I understand people want to say Mahomes is the most talented guy all time. And if you want to have that conversation, look, his physical gifts are above Brady's, but part of Brady's immense talent was being able to make the right play all the time and diagnosing things at the line all the time. I mean, how many touchdowns did we see him audible at the line and then throw a touchdown pass? How many times did we see him not throw an interception when other quarterbacks would have? To me, I know that's not physical talent, but that's part of quarterback talent overall, which I think often gets overlooked. So again, Mahomes was terrific at the end of that Super Bowl. He's been great his entire career. I wish the guy was on the Patriots, obviously. Love watching him play, but there's still a big gap between, number 1 and number 3 all time, and there will be for at least a decade.
I think it's pretty well put. Benny, where are you at on all of this?
So, yeah, just to piggyback off of what Jon said, and take this for what it's worth. I don't love the argument, but for the sake of tonight's episode, I'll bring it up. If Mahomes retired tomorrow, you can't say, and you tie it into like, is Mahomes the greatest of all time? You'd have to base it on, okay, well, what has he done to this point? If he retires tomorrow, is the whole body of work, how does it stack up against the greats of all time? Is he top 5 all time? Absolutely. But the raw numbers, as Jon just pointed out, they don't, big picture, right? They kind of pale in comparison to Brady's. He's got 3 Super Bowl rings and 3 Super Bowl MVPs. There's only 3 quarterbacks, Mahomes included, that have done that: Brady and Montana. Okay, we've already covered the accolades there. The physical talent is there. Like Jon said, I'd love to have him on New England. He's the greatest quarterback on the planet. He proved that. Where the Chiefs, I think, maybe not so much defensively, but I think the gap offensively between the 49ers and the Chiefs on paper in terms of raw talent is pretty stark, in my opinion. If you put Mahomes on the 49ers roster, like, you're talking undefeated seasons. But it proves that if you have the guy under center playing quarterback, that's still what drives championships in the NFL. So a guy like Mahomes is proving that he is right now the greatest that we have in this game. Could he get there? Absolutely. He's tracking in the right direction. He's only 28 years old. The money's going to come, and who knows what this Chiefs team is going to look like in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. Okay. Within the next 3 to 5 years, you can assume that Travis Kelce is going to retire. You have Patrick Mahomes making a ton more money, but you have new money coming into the NFL that's going to raise the salary cap. So what are the Chiefs going to be able to do to build around Mahomes to continue the trajectory they're on? Andy Reid wants to come back. Probably is the best coach in the league right now. So they're certainly trending in the right direction. But the part that irritates me the most, and Matt, I think you kind of alluded to it in the very beginning, is it took forever for conversations to happen to say that Brady was even in the same conversation as Montana. And even at that point, it was still, well, Brady's in the conversation, but I can make a case that he's not better than Montana, until he got that 4th ring. And there were still not as many. There were still, kind of people in the background chirping, saying, well, Brady's not better than Montana with 4 rings because it took Brady 6 Super Bowls to win 4. Montana did it in four times in 10 years. So Montana had Montana's undefeated in his 4 Super Bowls. Brady's
that
not.
Was a big argument for a long time.
And that was a big thing, right? And you shared with us, I think you posted on your Twitter account, there was an article from Bleacher Report back in 2011 that it was still, like, not even a conversation to them that Brady was even to where Montana is. So for me,
it was 10 reasons why Brady will never be comparable to Joe Montana, and ironically, they're not comparable.
Right.
Funny, just in the opposite direction now.
Yeah. So for certain people, and it's silly to me that there are people out there in the sports world that are willing to already anoint Mahomes as good as or better than Brady all time, despite the fact that he's light years away from him in certain peripheral stats. And it seems like people are taking what he's done in the playoffs, which is phenomenal, Okay, from what we've seen, he's a great guy to watch play. But it seems a little bit silly to try to anoint him the greatest of all time at this point when, he's got a long way to go. Could he get there? Sure, but he's got a long way to go. And I don't think we can realistically talk greatest of all time with Mahomes versus Brady, until, I would say 5 rings, depending on what his other numbers are. But I mean, you're talking he's got to win 6 or 7 to have a realistic conversation about whether he's eclipsed Brady as the greatest of all time.
Very fair. JR, how about you? Let's hear it.
Y'all basically summarized everything I wanted to say. I love Pat Mahomes. I mean, as a Patriots fan, it sucks not having a quarterback like that. We had 20 plus years of Tom Brady, all the Super Bowl wins, all the AFC championships, all the 6 Super Bowl parades, but there's no other guy I'd trust in the playoffs right now other than Pat Mahomes at quarterback. The dude's just electric and he gets the job done. He makes some stupid decisions sometimes, like the interception that he threw that was an overthrow. I can't remember if he was throwing it to Noah Gray or if it was to Travis Kelce. What was it, in the end of the second quarter before they went to halftime?
It was right out of the halftime start of the
It was
third
right out of
quarter.
halftime?
Yeah,
Okay,
the
because they were backed up into their own end. And
San Francisco did a flat nothing with that.
Yeah, and I was like, you got a turnover. I was thinking, like, San Francisco, you have a turnover. You have to capitalize on this if you want to win. And they didn't, and it gave the Chiefs life, and you see what happened. And I'm going to add on to it. I think Kyle Shanahan is a fraud. I think he's the biggest choke artist in the NFL as a head coach. Offensive mastermind, yes. Head coach, horrible. You had 2 previous Super Bowls to learn from your mistakes, and you still did the same thing again for the 3rd time.
On that, real quick, there was a stat I heard on the radio today, and yesterday too as well. They were kind of hammering on it today that between offensive coordinator and head coach, he has been to the Super Bowl 3 times. In all 3 games, he had double-digit leads and lost all
leads.
3 games. He had 10-point leads in all 3 Super Bowls, and he doesn't have a ring. Now, granted, once as an offensive coordinator, and obviously the Falcons made some highly questionable decisions at the end of Super Bowl 51. So it's hard to really pinpoint that on him. He put 28 points up. I think the Pats had a top 5 defense statistically in 2016. So he did his job as OC, but still, 3 10-plus point leads in 3 Super Bowls, and he didn't come away with a single victory.
Yeah, 3 fourth quarter leads, by the way. He had fourth quarter leads in all 3 of those, and 2 of the fourth quarter leads were 10-point leads of the 3. So another thing too, just your other point, was there any doubt, guys, that when Mahomes got that ball in overtime that they were going to score a touchdown?
It was game over.
And I think that's a common thread, like Brady to Montana to Mahomes. When they need to score, I really have no doubt that those 3 guys will lead a touchdown drive, and that separates them from some of the other guys that we talk about in that kind of list.
Yeah, when that ball went off San Fran's foot on the punt, I was like, all right, like they're done now. But anyways, I won't go around in circles of kind of what everyone kind of hit it pretty well. My big things with this discussion of Brady versus Mahomes is a few things. First of all, as you guys kind of mentioned, this generation thinks that talent at the quarterback position means you run around and make big throws. Talent at the quarterback position is just as much, if not more, mental than anything that you can do physically.
Well, your strongest muscle is your brain, so.
Exactly. So when someone comes and tells me, okay, Mahomes has more talent than Brady, what does that mean? Physically, sure, he can run around a field. He's more athletic. Maybe he can make a better off 1 foot throw, running to his left or running to his right. That doesn't mean, like, people don't understand that just because you're mobile and do it doesn't mean you can't have the same level of success in the pocket. And we obviously saw that with Brady. So you can almost turn the tables on them and say, if being mobile makes you more talented, then explain why Brady dominated the NFL for 2 decades without doing it. Would you argue that that's more impressive than doing it with mobility? I mean, like, that's the same type of argument. Second of all, the new generation, and like I mentioned kind of in the intro, I had someone say that, like, oh, people weren't crowning Brady the GOAT over Montana after 3 because they did it, blah, 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 blah. I was like, the real difference is is when Brady won his third, even when Brady went to his fourth Super Bowl and lost to the Giants, this was 2004, 5, 2007. Like the internet was like not really a thing.
Social media
Like
was just becoming a thing. Twitter was
there was not really
07.
much of a social media. Now we're in a generation where, you see guys like Skip Bayless and Nick Wright who have to be the first one to throw out just ridiculous takes because they need to create headlines. And so everyone sees this type of media, and that's what it's become. So it's all right. I need to be the first to proclaim Mahomes as the GOAT so that when I actually think he's the GOAT, I can say that I was 8 years ahead of it, 9 years ahead of it. That drives me absolutely nuts. And then finally, Ben, you hit it kind of perfectly. The GOAT discussion is not the boat discussion. Saying who's the best, who has the best peak, that's a different discussion. The GOAT discussion involves longevity. Now, if you have like a 9-year career and an 11-year career, okay, you're in the same ballpark. But like you said, if Mahomes retired tomorrow, I think you would be slapping player like people like Peyton Manning and Joe Montana and Drew Brees and John Elway and Dan Marino and these guys in the face who did it for like 15 to 20 to 24 years for Brady, did it for almost 2 decades. And it's saying, hey, you did this for over twice as long as Mahomes, and you're just going to get kicked aside because he had maybe a better peak. Because again, the better peak is more about the boat than the term GOAT. So for me, at least, when you talk about the GOAT discussion, it's if the person retired today, where would he sit? And I think, John, you had it pretty accurately. I would have Mahomes at this very moment. I would say so very solidified now after his third in the top 5 to 6. I'll consider him probably for 4 as well. And then even if he doesn't win, he doesn't have to win another Super Bowl. If he has say 6 more high level years, that's going to push him up. It still will push him up just because of the longevity thing and doing it over a long span of time. So he could not win another Super Bowl and still inevitably land in that top 3, and he probably will, even if he doesn't land in that top 3. But at this very moment, I just think it's a punch in the face to all these great quarterbacks, and not even just Brady. Like I said, Manning, Montana, Elway, these guys, it's just a punch in the face to say, okay, this guy who's done it for 7 years is had a greater career than you did over 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, I think there's 2 other pieces too that's worth adding for context. One is, and this is more to when you look at just the stats, the rules are set up where it's much easier to throw the ball now and throw the ball for high yards and high touchdowns than 2001 through 2005 or 6.
People don't recognize that Brady's numbers in the early 2000s in terms of comparably within the league were pretty high.
Yeah, I think he led the league in passing yards in 2002. He was really good. And another piece too, is Brady had obviously great defenses early, and he had good running games. Antoine Smith had 1,000 yards in 2001. Corey Dillon set the team rushing record in 2004. But his passing game weapons, I think they were good. Troy Brown had 101 catches in 2001. David Patton was a really good player. Deion Branch was a really good player. Those guys were really good players. They weren't Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, though. And I think that helps a lot too. Some of his numbers be maybe higher at this point in his career than what Brady's were. So, that's not to take away from Mahomes. I just think that those are some assets. Brady did have better running games than Mahomes, so that was an advantage for Brady. He did have this year. Mahomes' defense was great, but Brady's overall those first 3 years were better than what we saw out of the Chiefs, at least Mahomes' first 4 or 5 years. So I just think pure passing numbers wise, that's a little bit of context that is worth mentioning.
Yeah, and not to discredit Charlie Weiss, but I'll take Andy Reid over the leader of the offense in those early 2000 years. And I mean, even I'm a Josh McDaniels guy as an OC. I think he's been a pretty damn good OC for us for I think it's been 12, 15 years.
14 years, I think he ran the offense.
In total. I'll take Andy Reid. That will be interesting to see when Reid does eventually hang it up and see how it affects Mahomes a little bit. But let's transition into essentially kind of same conversation now. Rob Gronkowski versus Travis. What did I just? Yeah, Rob Gronkowski versus Travis Kelce.
It's not even an argument.
JR, I'll give you the starting four since you got one of the ends of the stick on the first try.
It's not even an argument. It's Gronkowski, clear and away. I mean, if you look at the numbers, yeah, they're comparable. Kelsey and Mahomes passed Brady and Gronk and playoff touchdowns and everything like that. But when you look at like just the player all around, it's Rob Gronkowski in a heartbeat. I'm just gonna say this, and like, no offense, I think Travis Kelce's a great player, but he's just an oversized slot receiver at this point. He doesn't block.
I put it out there, and I got it went viral, and people weren't happy with me. But
well, I'm not hating on the guy. I think he's a great player still. Like I'll always say, like Travis Kelce is an awesome player, and I would love Travis Kelce on the Patriots because
of course
he'd do some damage. But like when you compare him to like arguably the greatest tight end of all time, it's Patriots bias, yes, but if you look at this player all around, it's Gronk. If you want to put recency bias into it, it's Kelce. But if you look at just the player across the whole span of their career, it's Gronkowski.
Fair enough. Ben, where are you at?
I mean, same place. I think if you take the totality of the player, when you look at what Gronk meant to the offense, not just not that the tight end's a skill position per se, but from his offensive abilities, the pass catching ability aside, okay, for his entire career, he was essentially an extra offensive lineman. He was elite blocking. He set a ton of edges. He made the running game a lot easier. He made those slot screen passes to Edelman and Amendola work a lot easier because he's setting the edge on some of those, maybe slightly oversized but quicker defensive edge guys. He had the size to handle those guys that, other tight ends who don't move as well, may have struggled with. And he made, again, Pat's bias, right? He's made some phenomenal catches, especially for a guy his size. I want to say his playing size was what? He was 6'6", 265. In that ballpark, that's not a guy who, should run away from any defender, let alone defensive backs. There's, videos like the one that stands out in my head. They were playing on the road in Chicago, and he stiff-armed the corner, and then he outran a free safety to the end zone. So sheer athletic ability, sheer size, like what he could do with his build, I think is kind of unmatched. And then his physical ability to make catches. There's the one-handed catch over the middle in the Denver Broncos game. I think that was part of their, they were down 24-0. I think that was part of that comeback. They ended up winning it in overtime. Even Brady walked up to him and was like, "How the hell did you catch that?" This crazy, insane catch. He made diving catches against the Steelers. So for me, when you take the totality of the player, that's what sets him apart for Kelce, right? Not that defenses don't have to game plan and don't have to scheme around Travis Kelce. You absolutely do, because Travis Kelce, like that offense goes as Travis Kelce did. And just to draw comparisons to the Super Bowl, Travis Kelce had one target, one catch for 1 yard in the first half, and the Chiefs' offense was stagnant. I think is putting it generously. They did not do anything in the first half, and then things obviously turned around. Mahomes, yes, but Kelce was a totally different player. He was way more involved in the second half, and the offense ran through him. And same thing with Gronk, right? You had to game plan for Gronk, but I think his ability to do different things. He could run the seam route. He could run crossers over the middle. And he was a bigger guy, could run over guys. But the blocking thing is what really sets apart him and Kelce to me. Whether they ask him to do it or not, it's just not part of Kelce's game. Kelce's probably a top 5 tight end all time. I think that's a pretty easy thing to say. I mean, when you talk about the greats, it's Gronk, it's Gates, it's Gonzalez, it's Kelce. Throw whoever else you want into that top 5 conversation. But for me, it's Gronk, and it's unfortunate that his career was cut short, by injury. And in terms of impact on the Pats offense, the one example that I'll draw on is his injury in, I want to say it was the 2011 AFC Championship game. I'm blanking on the guy's name, Pollard for the Ravens, rolled up on his ankle, and he just wasn't the same the rest of that game. Obviously, they kind of squeak it out, but he wasn't. He couldn't really go really in the Super Bowl against the Giants in 2011, and that was obviously a big factor for them that hurt and hampered the offense's ability to really do anything. So
Yeah, that was
Kelce,
his best year ever, right? Was it 11? Did he put up like
Yeah,
Yeah,
18 touchdown.
and he had did he have 100 catches ever?
Off the top of my head, I know he had like
He came close.
1,300 yards.
He came close to, I want to say he came close to 100 receptions. And Kelce is obviously that for the Chiefs. If Kelce were to get injured in the Super Bowl,
He had
the Chiefs
90.
offense is done. Okay, so it's close.
124 targets, 90 catches for 13, 27, and 17 touchdowns.
Yeah, plus he had a rushing touchdown that year, so he had
Yeah.
18 total.
So yeah, I mean the totality of the player is what sets it apart. So for me it's Gronk.
There you go. John, where are you at?
Yeah, look, I think Travis Kelce is a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I think Rob Gronkowski is the greatest tight end of all time. And I think the gap there is smaller than the gap between Mahomes and Brady per se. But the issue with Gronk, like Kelsey's passing game numbers, for the most part, are higher than Gronk's. Gronk has more touchdowns and he averaged more yards per catch. Kelsey has the edge in pretty much every other category, but Rob Gronkowski, they've both played 11 seasons, but Kelsey's played 16 more games than Gronk in his career in the same amount of seasons because Gronkowski just had so many health issues. And part of that was bad luck. And part of that's the nature of the way he played the position because he was so physical and would run over guys and his blocking. So it was just, I mean, look at 2013. They probably wouldn't have beat that Seahawks team in a Super Bowl, but they probably would have gotten to another Super Bowl if he didn't tear his ACL against the Browns midway through the year. They had like the number one offense in the league for the 7-game span he was healthy that year, and they were average the rest of the season. So, I mean, that's just one snapshot, but I think that tells you just his impact was massive from really the time he walked in the door in Foxborough all the way till the time he finished his career in Tampa Bay. And the blocking thing to me is huge too. Right. Travis Kelce, I think, is an okay blocker. Like his career run blocking grade on PFF is 64.87. It's fine. Like it's pretty good. Not great, but not terrible. Gronk's is 71.4. Like that's a difference to me. And they use Gronk to block a lot more. I mean, part of the reason the Patriots running games consistently were much better than the Chiefs running games have been is because of Gronkowski and other tight ends they had too. But that's a huge thing to me. Gronk was a much better blocker, and he did it all the time, pass blocking and especially run blocking. He was a dominant force in the pass game, and he just suffered more injuries. So, look, could Kelce surpass? I think this is one, like, I don't know if I see Mahomes fully surpassing Brady. I maybe could see Kelce doing it if he plays a few more years and really stacks up some numbers and maybe wins another Super Bowl. But, I mean, Gronkowski won 3 Super Bowls as a player. He has a 4th ring from a year he was out, but he was so physically dominant in the passing game and running game. That's why I give him a slight edge. But again, I mean, Kelsey's a first ballot Hall of Famer to me too.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Go ahead, JR.
I was just saying, if you want to compare like just the ability of the player, and this isn't like, I don't like bringing this player up because of everything that happened, but if you're just like talking about raw ability as just a pass catcher, you could compare Kelce to possibly Aaron Hernandez just as a pass catcher.
Yeah,
not as just an all-around tight end, just as a pass catcher. He plays a similar game than Aaron Hernandez did.
Yeah. I think like my big thing, and I'm kind of a little bit flipped with you, John, is like, and I actually just posted this out right before we came on, is I think when you compare Mahomes and Brady, they're doing it in different ways, obviously, in like play style and QB style. But like, I think that their overall success, talent, ability, dominance at the position are in the same tier. When I watch Kelce versus Gronk, and I'm like, I won't go down he's just a slot receiver, like he's not actually a tight end type of thing.
It was a joke, but.
No, well, big picture, like, yes, it's a joke, but because he is obviously technically a tight end. But when you watch them both play, Kelce, first of all, like you mentioned, he's a mediocre blocker. He's not horrible. He's mediocre as a blocker. But as a pass catcher, he's not doing what at least I would view as like what a traditional tight end does. He does line up more often than not as a receiver than a tight end. He runs a lot of short hitches, in routes, nothing that's, running up the seam like Gronk did in snatching it over two guys, these corner routes that he had to go up and get it, going across the field into double coverage in getting it up over these guys. Kelsey does a lot of, all right, I'm going to go across. Are you going to hit me for 10 yards and I'll run for another 10 yards? And it's great. He's great at it. He's great at feeling coverage. He's great against zone. He's great against man because he's bigger and faster than a lot of guys. He is a phenomenal pass catcher. That doesn't mean in kind of like how you guys insinuate, like went at it, is it's kind of simple for me. Is they're both great pass catchers, different ways, but like they're in every other aspect of the position. Gronk clears Kelsey. I think yards after the catch, it's not even close. Like Kelsey's good after the catch. Gronk was that much better after the catch. I mean, Gronk had people going knee hunting every single time he caught the ball because he was not, you couldn't tackle him. It was the only moderately successful way to get him to the ground was to go straight at his knees and at his ankles. That's why he had multiple ankle sprains and broken arms and torn ACL and all that. He yards after the catch as a blocker, he excels. In the red zone, he was better. He did it on special teams as well. I think wasn't it special teams that Gronk broke his arm or something like that?
2012, on a field goal protection, which really, to me, though, like that's also just bad coaching. They shouldn't have had, like, why do you have
I
that
do
guy?
agree that.
Like, that's also some of the Kelsey stuff is the Chiefs, the way they structure their offense. Like when you have Tyreek Hill running off coverage, you don't need Kelsey to run down the seams as much. And then now they don't have that guy, but they structure it a little different. And maybe in the long run, it's better for Kelsey because he's not going through as many people and maybe he'll stay healthier.
Of course. I mean, like, again, I'm not trying to, like, people go, oh, you got a Pats bias or a Boston bias. It's not that. I have Kelsey third all time. It goes Gronk, Gonzalez, Kelsey, Gates, and Shannon Sharp for me. Like, I'm not trying to take away what Kelsey has done because he's phenomenal at what he does. But when, like you guys said, when you take the totality of the player, of the position, and say, okay, they're both great receivers. They were both uncoverable. They're both hard to tackle. They were both a menace as a pass catcher. And then Gronk is just better at every other aspect of the position. I think that's like kind of what it comes down to. And, I got Chiefs fans in my mentions trying to like devalue blocking and all that type of stuff. And I'm like, you're just devaluing it because it hurts the argument. The big picture, the totality of the position, Gronk is an all-around better tight end. I think that's just kind of the best way to put it, I think. Any final thoughts on that?
No.
We jump in? We'll leave it there. We'll transition now into some direct Patriots thoughts. Obviously, as we've currently been seeing over the last couple of weeks, they are filling out their coaching staff. I know most recently, just a couple hours ago, they hired a running back coach in Taylor Embry. I believe since we last talked, I don't think they hired Tiquan Underwood as an assistant wide receiver coach. They brought back Brian Belichick. Mike Pellegrino's back in the mix. And then the two I think were definitely new since the last time is Dante Hightower is in the mix at inside linebacker coach. And is it Brian Wilkins? So I think Brian Wilkins. That he came from the Giants and the Ravens, the outside linebacker coach. Where are your thoughts at, John, and kind of how the coaching staff's shaking up? And what do you want to see them? Is there anything specific you want to see them do with the final few openings?
Yeah, look, so I'll start defensively. I really like their defensive staff. And I think, ironically, this is the side of the ball where pretty much every coach they got was their first choice. Whereas I don't think that's the case on offense and special teams. Like I think DeMarcus Covington, I know he's young, but he's already been a co-defensive coordinator before. He was that in Eastern Illinois in 2016. So he's ran a unit. He's been with the Patriots 7 years, won a Super Bowl here. He's worked with outside linebackers and obviously defensive line for the last 4 seasons. And the biggest thing that has impressed me is it feels like every year they've had defensive linemen get better. And I think that's a really underrated aspect of coaching, and that not enough NFL teams, and especially the Patriots the last couple of years, are good at is player development, right? I mean, how many guys on the Patriots offense this past year were better players than they were the year before? The answer is 0, right? No player development there. Whereas defensively, we saw Christian Barmore get a lot better. We've seen Anthony Jennings and Josh Uche get a lot better. And I know they're listed as linebackers, but they're up amongst the defensive line so much on so many snaps that I feel as though Covington probably has a hand in that. So I really like that hire a lot. I like Dante Hightower there because you have a lot of experience on the defensive side. I know Covington's young, but he's experienced. Brian Belichick and Mike Pellegrino really experienced. Montgomery, the defensive line coach, they're experienced. So to have a less experienced coach, but someone who was an elite player at that position, I like that as the inside linebackers coach there. And you mentioned Brian Belichick and Mike Pellegrino. I think that's huge. I think that's one of the more underrated aspects of their whole staff because Gerard Mayo, pretty much all his experience as a coach and as a player is in the front 7, right? Played linebacker, coach linebackers. That's where he's been, is in that front 7. DeMarcus Covington, all his coaching experience is in the front 7 with the Patriots. Now you have 2 guys who are experienced coaching the secondary and seeing everything work together. We've talked, and not when I say we, I mean everyone that follows the Patriots, all the great corners that they have had develop over the years, the undrafted guys, late round draft picks. And I know Bill Belichick deserves a ton of credit for that. Mike Pellegrino has been here a while, and he's been a huge part of that. And I think Brian Belichick at safety as well. I think that's a huge piece. So I'm really excited about their defensive staff. I feel like they have a lot going on there, and I'll shift it over to you guys, and then we can kind of maybe come back on their offensive staff so I don't just keep rambling for too long here. But I'm really excited about their defensive staff. I think it's one area where it feels like they got their first choice pretty much every area.
Yeah. Where are you at, Ben, JR?
Same. I was a little bit slow to the game, getting on the DeMarcus Covington train, comparatively to you guys. But I think that's kind of a slam dunk move. I mean, that's been consistently the best performing and best coach singular unit, in my opinion, that we've seen on this Patriots team in the last 4 years. And I say 4 years because obviously, it's post Brady, right? Singular unit post Brady has been consistently good every year. John kind of hit the nail on the head that I don't think gets talked about enough is the player development piece. And there's guys that, they seem to find guys, especially on defense. Obviously, that was kind of Bill's niche over the years. They just found diamonds in the rough that they could coach up and turn into stars. J.C. Jackson, probably one of the top options that comes to mind. Obviously they let him go because he wanted to get paid. But, I think when you have guys who are willing to come in and do the work, the player development piece, in part kind of takes care of itself. So defensively, I'm definitely excited. That's been, that was, if they had a bright spot at all last year, it was defensive line. I think they can certainly, get a lot better. They had some injuries. Christian Gonzalez seemed to be on a pretty strong path to making a push for defensive rookie of the year. He looked excellent as a rookie. I think they got some guys that can certainly come along, and, was their strength last year. I think it'll be their strength this fall, and hopefully again more development through training camp, and hopefully again those guys can come back and piece into this. I love the Dante Hightower move. It makes a ton of sense to make him the inside linebackers guy because that's what he played, that's what he knows, and hopefully he can grow and kind of do what Mayo did. Belichick kind of begged Mayo to come out of finance and the private sector and coach his position, and he flourished at it, and it shows they're rewarding him with a head coaching position. And, maybe Hightower can do the same thing. They're both very well liked within the organization. And I think connecting with players, which I think a younger staff certainly has the edge in doing that. The age gap's not that big with some of these guys. So, the chemistry and the camaraderie, I think is a little bit, undervalued, and I'm just excited to see how they round into shape. Obviously, several months until camp and from on from there, but I'm excited to see what this defense will look like come summertime.
Good. JR, where you at?
Like Ben said, and like John said, like the defense and everything like that, like player development has been off the charts for that. The reason why I worry about, or the reason I've been very worried about the offense is because over the last few years, you've noticed that receivers, other than ones that have played in the NFL that have had an NFL experience, have done well here, like Kendrick Bourne. And, well, Jacoby's like the diamond in the rough that was picked up as a UDFA. But you just notice that a lot of these guys that they draft or have like signed don't work out. I mean, the Nelson Aguilar signing was pretty bad. The Juju Smith-Schuster signing is pretty bad. Devontae Parker trade, but my thing is like it also goes in hand with who's coaching the players. Troy Brown, great wide receiver in his day. Don't think he's the best coach for the players. I'd like to see them actually go out and get somebody who's just experienced as just a coach their whole career, because sometimes, and I've said this before, it's harder for guys to coach something that comes naturally to them than something that they're trained up to coach. Because some of these things that Troy Brown possibly is trying to teach these guys like Taekwon, it doesn't come naturally to them like it does to Troy Brown or like a guy like Deion Branch or a guy like Edelman or Amendola. Like, you want to find a coach that's kind of like a player's coach, but at the same time can teach the right fundamentals. And that's what we're lacking on offense. Minus like the coaching for the running game. Even we hired a new running backs coach, but like other than the running game, the offense has been stale for years now. I remember reading an article, I think it was 2018. There was an article, I forget who posted it, but it was New England Patriots 35 most predictable plays in the Josh McDaniel playbook. So taking that, this offense is need an overhaul, and they're finally doing it, and let's see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, offensively, like I think we're kind of a little bit more wait and see. Obviously, we don't even know. I know Mike Reese said that Troy Brown has been welcomed back. Doesn't necessarily mean as a wide receiver coach. Offensively and the staff wise, it's kind of a wait and see. I think Alex Van Pelt was a solid hire overall. He's going to bring a little bit of different scheme. Defensively, the staff, it's young. I love the Dante Hightower hiring because, well, I think it's easier to integrate someone like him when the head coach was the linebacker coach prior to this. Same thing with Covington being on the D line. He's promoted. He knows everybody. They both know everybody on this defensive staff. And like you guys kind of mentioned, this team really didn't defensively, especially after they lost Gonzalez and Judon, didn't have that much on paper talent. And yet they performed at a pretty damn high level. And that comes a lot down to coaching. So we'll see what effect Belichick and Steve Belichick and Brian and Bill had on that. But like the defensive staff, I'm pretty damn happy with. Offensively, we'll wait and see. I'd like to see them, make a change, I guess, from Troy Brown. Overall, though, like I'm not as thrown blame on Troy Brown as much as JR has for the last few months. In the end, they just haven't had really any talent at the position. For 2 or 3 years, Jacoby Myers was your best player. And if that's your best talent and receiving weapon for a QB, that's kind of embarrassing. I mean, that's kind of it. That's on my end. I'm happy with Brian.
Earlier is like the lack of attention to drafting and signing true offensive talent is part of it as well.
Yeah, the thing that would have helped Troy Brown coach Taekwon Thornton the most is if they had drafted George Pickens instead, right? So I mean, that's also a big part of the issue here. And I think, like I said, their offensive staff, like I'm excited about their defensive staff. Their offensive staff, I'm not like mad about it, but I mean, Alex Van Pelt was not their first choice, and Jeremy Springer, special teams coordinator, not their first choice either. So that gives me a little bit of pause there. Like I think Van Pelt's a good coach, but as I mentioned, I mean, the Patriots have not had any players over the past 3 years on offense get better year to year. Some guys have stayed the same, like Ramondre Stevenson's been good the whole time. Mike Onwenu's been good the whole time, but none of those guys have really gotten better. I haven't seen any players really consistent. Even Kendrick Bourne, yeah, his numbers were a lot better in 2023 than 22. He wasn't a better player. They just used him more because Matt Patricia, for some reason, wouldn't use him 2 years ago. So I think that's a huge thing. Like, you go back to the last time the Patriots won the Super Bowl in 2018, they had the best coaching staff in the NFL, and including in that, the best offensive coaching staff in the NFL. I mean, you're talking McDaniels at coordinator, but then Chad O'Shea coaching the receivers, Ivan Fears coaching the running backs, Scarnecchia coaching the offensive line. I mean, they were loaded with great coaches there. And that's, Matt, I think it was your earlier question. If there's one thing I would like to see them do, Troy Brown, look, my all-time favorite Patriot, even more so than Brady or anyone else. Love Troy Brown. And I'd be happy for him to be part of the organization. I think they should bring back Chad O'Shea to be their receivers coach.
Yes.
And if Taekwon
I
Underwood,
was just about to say it.
Yeah, and if Taekwon Underwood wants to be I know he's going to be the assistant receivers coach, I think that's good. Like, you have a guy with playing experience who played here, but also coached other places, coached in college. Like, I like that. But I think Chad O'Shea was someone that they weren't drafting receivers very well for the 15 years he was here, but he was getting the most out of guys consistently. And you even saw free agents that came. I thought Danny Amendola was better in New England than he had been previously in his career, right? And obviously, look, I know a huge chunk of that is Brady. I get it, but it felt like they were always getting the most. I mean, look at Philip Dorsett, ended up being a sneaky, decent contributor on a team that won a Super Bowl.
Hogan.
Yeah, Chris Hogan led the league in yards per reception in 2016. Like, he was a really good player in New England. And I think that's why, to me, like, and again, I don't love Alex Van Pelt, but I like him. I think he'll be good. I think their offense, I mean, it can't get any worse, really, than last year. I think it'll be better than it was. I like Scott Peters. Cleveland had some great offensive lines in his time there. They were top 8 his first 3 years there. This year, they were, I think, 22nd in PFF, but they had 3 offensive tackles miss significant time with injuries. So, like, I think he's legit. I think he's the real deal. But I feel like a guy like O'Shea would really get me a lot more excited, because I think it's a guy that's done it at a really high level, at a championship level, which, frankly, look, again, this is not to dump on these guys, but Alex Van Pelt hasn't been a Super Bowl offensive coordinator. Scott Peters hasn't been a Super Bowl offensive line coach, right? And that's not all their fault, but O'Shea's been that at the receiver position. So that's one thing I would love to see them do. And again, I like their offensive staff. Don't love it. If they added a guy like O'Shea specifically, or a guy with that profile, I'd like it a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So we're already a little past what I wanted to, but I want to stick with the Patriots here, and do one more topic. Big picture, they need a lot of pieces. They have the opportunity and the assets, whether it's picks or money in free agency or via trade, to make numerous big splashes. My question to you guys, and we'll start with JR. I'll give you the floor here. How set are you on going QB number 3? And are you more of the concept, get the QB and then build around the QB, or build around the position of the QB and then get him once that's kind of already put in place?
All right, here's my thing.
How are you feeling on that?
Here's my thing. I'm going to say this first. I understand the logic of people wanting the Patriots to trade back out of 3, trade down to maybe like 6 or 8 or even 11 or 12. I get the logic. I understand, okay, we can get a haul of picks, maybe a player in return, like, as well as some other stuff. But this team hasn't had a true quarterback since Brady left. That's the first part this team needs, is a quarterback. And I mean, I understand people are saying, oh, you could get J.J. McCarthy at 11, or you can get Michael Penix Jr. or Bo Nix in the second round. That's all fine and dandy, but those aren't game-changing quarterbacks like the top 3 quarterbacks are, whether that be Caleb Williams, Drake May, or Jaden Daniels. We all know Caleb Williams is either going to go to the Bears or whoever trades for the first overall pick and give Chicago a king's ransom for it. And then you're left with either Drake May or Jaden Daniels, depending on where the Commanders go. I mean, you'd think they'd go Jaden with Cliff Kingsbury being hired there, having his kind of success with Patrick Mahomes in college and Kyler Murray at the NFL level, and working with Caleb in college as well. My thing is, I understand don't take a quarterback if you don't love him. But with this draft, I don't think you really need to love the quarterback. I think you just need to have an appreciation for it and build around him, because one way or another, all three of them can be busts. But at this point, it's just smarter to go quarterback and build around him for the future than it is to take, Marvin Harrison Jr. at 3, or trade back and take Joe Alt at number 8 or number 10. I get it. You're building pieces for the future, but we're never going to be in this position again to pick as high as we are. And if they are, something seriously went wrong. So get your guy now, build around him for the future.
Fair. Ben, where are you at?
So, yeah, I'm a little bit more quote unquote all in on a quarterback at 3. I think if the team really believes, and I'll just go off the assumption here that Caleb Williams goes number 1, well, which I expect he will, regardless of who's picking there. To me, if the Patriots really believe that the gap between Daniels and May is significant enough that they love one of those guys more than the other one, I would love for them to be a little bit more aggressive and go get that guy. That's one thing that they haven't really done with any regularity over the last 20 years, is be a little bit more aggressive to go get the guy they want rather than taking the guy that just happens to be there. And I know those are two different extremes. I'm not saying they did it all the time. I personally think that there is a significant gap between the top 3 and number 4. Now, however you want to rank those guys, for me, it's Williams, May, Daniels. That's how I rank those top 3 guys. Whoever you put 4th, okay, the gap between Daniels and number 4 to me is so significant that if you pass on a quarterback now, I think you're extending your rebuild by a minimum of 1 more season. You've seen, and granted, they had pieces in place that allowed him to be successful, but you saw with Houston what interjecting a guy like CJ Stroud did for that offense. I know that they had Nico Collins was already there. Dalton Schultz already there. They made a significant move to go up from number, I think it was 12 to 3 to get Will Anderson, who, who's great on the defense. And so I get that there were pieces in place, but, and I'll be the first to admit, I looked at the Houston Texans as a team this year that I fully expected to have a top 5 draft pick. I did not think they were going to be very good. And I just think that the infusion of a young, dynamic playmaker under center matters in the NFL. I think going back to the Super Bowl, you saw like how Pat Mahomes essentially, with a not as good offense around him compared to what Brock Purdy has, to me, watching what Mahomes did showed that if you can get the guy at quarterback, that having the guy under center is what drives wins and what drives championships in this league. So I'm all in for a quarterback at 3. I know the safe pick is doing something else. And I don't have a second number in here to back this up, but it's like a 35 or 40% hit rate on first round quarterbacks is kind of roughly the percentage on does that guy pan out and really be a significant piece to your offense. Again, I don't have any facts to back this up, but perception says that anybody drafted second round or later, that 35% drops significantly. And that's just sheer perception on, thinking about guys who are second round, third round, fourth round quarterbacks over the last 20 years. How many of those guys actually played significant long-term roles in the offenses they ended up in? There's a couple of guys, obviously Russell Wilson comes to mind as a 3rd round draft pick. Dak Prescott is a 4th round draft pick. Like, those guys are cornerstones of their teams. So sure, can you get that guy on a day 2, mid-round draft pick? Sure. But the likelihood that you hit on that guy in those rounds is a lot less than the likelihood that you're hitting on a quarterback up front. I would love for them to be aggressive. I like May a little bit more than Daniels, so I'll go so far as to say is, figure out a way to trade up with Washington at number 2 and go get the guy you want, because I really think that the floors and ceilings of these top 3 guys are safe enough that and the ceilings are through the roof, that you really could find a franchise quarterback now and then use all this cap space you have in the offseason and go sign a top wide receiver. And figure out with the draft. And like, I'm fine if they're not a immediate contending team in 2024. That's, I fully expect that this is probably going to be a 2025 true contending team. But but getting the quarterback now puts them in the conversation of you can push for a playoff spot and build on success, and now you have good talent to add to, and then make another step forward in 2025.
Yeah, John, how about you?
Yeah, look, to piggyback off the point about the Super Bowl, 12 of the last 15 Super Bowl winners had a star quarterback, right? And the only 3 that didn't, 2011 Giants, 2012 Ravens, and 2017 Eagles, had a quarterback that played like a star in the playoffs or in the Super Bowl. So you have to have great quarterback play if you're going to win the Super Bowl no matter what. However,
one of those are going to the Hall of Fame too, probably.
Yeah, and I think like the issue is if you like, I'm not one of the, you can't just take a quarterback to take a quarterback, right? It has to be
Right, you
a
can't
guy
do
that's
that.
actually going to be right. Cause like even another aspect of this, like Matt Stafford was in Detroit for a long time and they were never a real Super Bowl contender. Great player, star. He goes to LA where they actually have some infrastructure there and they win the Super Bowl, right? So you got to have obviously more than I'm not one of those people that just say, take the quarterback and your problems are solved, right? You need to have the guy. And to me, like the most important question for the Patriots for the rest of the offseason, and I think the most important question for the entire NFL draft for every team, is what do the Patriots think of Jaden Daniels? Because if they like him and they think he's going to be a franchise guy, you take him at 3 or you trade up to 2 to make sure you get him. But either way, you're taking him in the top 3. If they don't like him and they think he's not that, and Williams and May are going to go 1-2 and they don't like him, then all of a sudden, well, that opens the door for Marvin Harrison Jr. or Olu Fashanu or a trade down or maybe even a trade up if they really want Williams or May. Like that's going to affect the rest of the first round and potentially the rest of the entire draft is what they think of Jaden. Because again, if they like him, he's going in the top 3 and they're going to find a way to get him. If they don't, though, it opens up a bunch of possibilities there. So I think you have to have a good quarterback if you're going to win the Super Bowl, no matter what. And can you get a lot better with a good young quarterback? I mean, we just saw the Texans do it, but if you do it the wrong way, then you're going to be the Panthers with Bryce Young, right? So you have to also do it the right way. It has to be someone you're confident in being the right guy. So that's what, like, I think, like looking at them going forward, that's the biggest question they have to. And free agency, I think they should address wide receiver and free agency. And I'm not saying to throw the bag at everyone, but yeah, I mean, like you can afford to sign T. Higgins or Calvin Ridley and bring in some real talent. I think you need to re-sign Mike Onwenu, and I think you need to then still add a tackle either in free agency or with your second round pick and upgrade there. So the good thing is they have multiple high picks, in every round. They have high picks in every round, and they have a lot of money to spend. But they have their work cut out for them, right? You're picking 3rd overall for a reason because you were awful on offense and special teams last year. So I think the path is there for them to get a lot better, much like the Houston Texans did. But the biggest thing is what do they think of Jaden Daniels? Because that's going to me going to affect the rest of their offseason and the whole NFL draft.
Yeah, I think you guys kind of a mix of all 3 of you. For me is, if you don't love a guy, you can't just take him. You can't just take the position because you think you need it. Because if you screw up, you're going to be automatically back in that top 3, and you're going to be trying to get it in. All of a sudden, your team is now set back another 2 or 3 years. For me personally, I have the same top 3 as Ben. It goes Caleb, Drake, and Jaden Daniels. I do think there's a real possibility that the Commanders take Jaden Daniels still. So, whether it's going to be Daniels or May, I like both of them enough at the moment, I think, to say take them at 3. But if they can't properly surround them, they'll put themselves in a situation where they could ruin another quarterback. That's the big thing for me is if they're going to do it, they need to be aggressive at other, improving the other aspects of the offense. Like you said, Onwenu, I think you need to not only bring back Onwenu, but open up the possibility to maybe putting him at left tackle if he's open to that. Ideally, I think his best spot is, I think his best spot is guard. But I think he's still a really good right tackle. I would like to see them address. It seems like the wide receiver position in free agency is going to be tough this year. Higgins is getting tagged. I think Pittman will get tagged. I don't know about Mike Evans. Ridley's good. I don't love Ridley. I would like to see them address the tackle positions in, re-signing on Onwenu, and then either in free agency or go and get someone via trade that, maybe has 1 or 2 years left. Who's Cleveland's left tackle? I believe he's due for a little bit of a payday. I forget off the top of my head.
I know their right tackle is DeJuan Jones, who the Patriots picked Chad Ryland instead of. If you want something to feel good about, guys, that
is it something Wyatt something, or is it?
No, Jonah. It's not Jonah Jackson, right? No, that's Cincy, right?
No. Fuck. What's his name? I think he went to Bama, right?
Willis. That's
Yeah.
who it is. Willis. I believe he has 1 more year left, I think. And I heard whispers that he could be available. Obviously, we have the Cleveland OC and their offensive line coach. That's just one example. I would go send maybe a future pick or maybe a different player, whatever it may be, and going to get and addressing the tackle position so that they can go into the draft more focused on a couple big needs. And that same thing goes defensively. I would like to see them spend on one of those 3 main needs offensively and then load the defensive talent. I was talking to Ben earlier today. If he's looking for a big payday, I would consider adding Chris Jones defensively.
Oh, God, yeah.
If he's chasing the money, you talk about putting Jones and Barmore next to each other coming up the middle at quarterbacks, that would be an absolute nightmare for offensive lines. But big picture, I if they like a QB, and I believe they should enough, take him at 3, and you better be aggressive. You can't sit on your hands and say, we took the guy, now let's just hope he's good. No, you got to take him and you got to put him in a position to succeed, which is quite literally the complete opposite of what Bill Belichick did for Mac Jones. And we can go into that for days and what influenced all those decisions. But he drafted Mac Jones 15 and gave him dog shit to work with and expected him to just be great. Take your guy. Like I said, like Ben said, if they love May, I would I'm not giving up a future first to swap picks with the Commanders, but if it means you give up a future second or third to swap 1 pick back, I'll consider it if you love May that much or you love Daniels that much. Make sure you get the guy that you want.
And I think, just to touch on what you had said, I think what happens a month from now is going to be very telling with how they're going to approach the draft, right? We can speculate who may or may not get tagged, but if the Pats go out and they go get, say they go get a Mike Evans and then they add somebody else, as a wide receiver or a guy at the offensive skill position, that to me says, they love one of these quarterbacks and they fully plan on drafting them. And we're giving you an offensive weapon to work with immediately, and then you can develop into the system, right? I think offensive line is going to be tough in the free agent market because basically there's only really one guy at the top of the market. But I think, like John kind of hit the nail on the head, you've got to bring back on Onwenu. I mean, I think that's a key offensive signing. Obviously they've got some questions on the defensive side of the ball too with Duggar and Uche, among others. But I think, it'll be fun to watch. I mean, what's today? It's February 13th. We've got 28 days until legal tampering. The combine's in 2 weeks. So, certainly a lot's going to happen sooner rather than later that hopefully will, fuel the fire for speculation on how they're going to approach things at number 3.
Yeah, 2 quick comments on that, and actually 3 very quick comments, and we can move on. If they can't extend on Onwenu, give him a tag. I think it's that important that he's back. We talked about, Ben, the transition tag. It's a little bit less. That would allow him to test the market, but then the Pats have the option to match it. Second of all, his market, that's why I like the transition tag with how high and highly regarded this tackle class is. you might get teams that are unwilling to really throw him the bag to be a right tackle if they feel like this tackle class is that loaded. Second, Mike Evans. Yeah, if they sign someone like Mike Evans, like that is all the sign in the world that they're going quarterback at 3. You don't sign Mike Evans to sign like Jacoby Brissett to be your quarterback or something.
Or running back with Mac or Zappi.
Yeah. In third and final, we haven't touched on it, but I just want to say it. I'm going to throw up if I see another suggestion of bringing Justin Fields to the New England Patriots.
Come on, man. You don't
hate
want to
it.
trade 34 for Justin Fields?
I hate it. I absolutely hate it. The only scenario in which I would take Justin Fields is if you're talking about like their 2025 like fourth round pick. Like at that point, sure, like maybe I'll take the chance. I'm not giving up 34 for a guy who can't read defenses before pre or post snap.
And you have to extend him too. So
if I see another credible person suggest it for number 34, I'm going to lose my goddamn mind. But all right, let's transition. We're going to skip past the Celtics. We'll have to get into that more next week and talk about, their expectations. But I wanted to finish up here. We got another, 20 to 30 minutes max with Boston Red Sox. Cora came out today, made a few comments. Yoshida looks like the primary DH. Rafaela has, if he makes the team, will be the primary center fielder, but I think that's a very, very big if. He was a little hesitant about his future as manager, but I don't personally look too much into it. Breslow came out and basically said, we like our team. He said everything a GM was going to say. We like our team. We might add if the right situation comes up, blah, 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 blah. Big picture, John, where are you on this team? What do you expect of potential ads in these final couple weeks heading into spring training? How are you feeling overall?
Yeah, look, here's the issue. Okay. So obviously I'm a big Red Sox fan, want them to win every single game. But the two things I'm most excited about from this offseason are them bringing back Theo Epstein and signing a player in Michael Fulmer who won't pitch at all this year. Like that's the two most exciting things they've done, which does not make me feel really good about the 2024 Red Sox. And look, first of all, there's a macro issue here in that Baltimore is awesome. They just got new owners and they traded for Corbin Burns. Tampa is always, look, I think Tampa is going to drop off a little from last year, and now Glasnow's gone, but they're still going to be in the 80s as far as wins. I mean, high 70s. Like they're still going to be a solid team, at least a tough team to beat. The Yankees got a lot better than they were last year. And I think the Blue Jays, I mean, they're a playoff team, right? So you're in arguably the toughest division in baseball. I mean, that NL West has the Dodgers, the Padres, and the Diamondbacks too, but this is arguably the toughest division in baseball. And all four other teams have better rosters than you. So to me, that's a real concern for the Red Sox. Like I'm excited to see Yoshida at DH pretty much. It seems like it's going to be full-time pretty much. Cause I think, I thought he'd be pretty good. He exceeded my I mean, he hit 289 last year. He exceeded 72 RBIs. I was excited to see him there all the time. I think Tristan Casas was great last year he had that tough month of May. And then after that, he was awesome. So I'm excited to see him back. Chris Martin actually got a Cy Young vote. So good for him. Hopefully they don't trade him either. Right. But those are pieces I'm excited about, but they came into this offseason needing two frontline starting pitchers, and they signed Lucas Giolito, who I think on a really good team is a 3 and maybe a 2 in his best years. He had a couple of years where he was sub 3.5 ERA, but like they have not taken the necessary steps to make them a better team. Like I don't look at them and think I think they're going to be more entertaining and maybe win a handful more games than last year's team. I don't look at them like they're a better team really overall than they were last year. And I think everyone in their division got better. So unfortunately, I'm coming into this season pretty pessimistic. Now, look, could they sign Blake Snell tomorrow? Could they sign Jordan Montgomery tomorrow? Then yeah. And could they trade for Dylan Cease tomorrow? And yeah. And that would change my outlook. But even if they did that, let's say they signed Jordan Montgomery tomorrow, they're still not better than Baltimore. They're still probably not better than the Yankees. Maybe they're better than Tampa Bay and maybe on the same level as Toronto, but it's just, that's the issue is like they have multiple big needs and they really haven't taken steps to address. I mean, it's February 13th and they haven't really taken any meaningful steps outside of hiring Andrew Bailey as pitching coach to address them.
I I can't disagree with really any of that. Ben, where are you at?
I'm kind of.
I wish I felt better about him. I'm sorry. I wish I did, but I don't.
Yeah, so as a lifelong fan, played baseball, so like I dive down the rabbit holes, probably more so than the average guy. My biggest disappointment, and John really hammered this, is their biggest need happened to be two guys. They needed frontline starters, and they didn't really do that. I think could they find lightning in a bottle, and Lucas Giolito shines and he stays durable and he pitches like the Chicago White Sox version of Lucas Giolito last year, not the Cleveland Guardians, and I don't even remember where else he played last year.
He was
Angels.
There. Yeah.
And I know that he had some personal off the field issues that may have contributed to his struggles. But maybe we find lightning in a bottle with him, because he does have an opt-out built into that 2-year contract, and he looks at it as an opportunity. He's like, look, like, I got my life in order. I'm gonna pitch my ass off to this Red Sox team and give them all I got, because that gives me a chance to opt out and go get a big money deal a year from now. They still, right now, I think the back end of that rotation has a massive question mark. Nobody really moves the needle at the back end of this rotation for me. I think that, they're banking on Brian Bale making that next step. And, I think he can get there. To me, he's a number 3 at this point. Could he get into that conversation of being a 2? Sure. I just don't think he's there yet. I just think he just needs more time to develop. I think they've put some pieces in place to help that pitching come along, but that's kind of a wait and see. Big picture, with all 4 other teams on paper being better than you, and with question marks at pitching, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't win more games this year than they did last year. I think that, they're kind of in the same ballpark. I think they're kind of in that mid 70s conversation. I know they faded at the end of last year, and they were, talent wise, they're probably better than a 76 win team. But that's kind of where I see it. I think that the lack of willingness to invest long-term into free agents is, at least in the short term, really is going to hurt the on-field performance. Jorge Soler got a pretty reasonable contract, and I get that there's some inconsistencies with him, and, he's up 1 year, he's down the next, but their unwillingness to add a 3rd year to an offer to Soler is why he's out in San Francisco and he's not in Boston. Right. Could they go out and they get a pitcher? Sure. And it would certainly help them, but I wish they would they'd push it a little bit more than they have, and they would fill out the needs. And I get that they've got guys coming up, and and obviously if they end up projecting properly, Teal and Roman Anthony and Marcelo look like they're going to be very good to great players and a core to build around. I'm a big pitching guy. That's my concern. The bullpen, I think, is going to be fine, but I think once you get past Giolito and Bayo, I think that teams are really going to hammer this team unless they can bring somebody else in. And I really want them to win. Like I said, like lifelong fan. Didn't suffer for as many years as my dad did, but I'd like them to kind of get back to the way things were 15, 20 years ago, and spend a little bit more and put a really
5 years ago
a high quality product on the field.
Can I add one more thing to that too?
Yeah.
Because I think you brought up something interesting, and when you mentioned Teal and Meyer and some of these young guys that they have, and I agree with you. Like I think out of those big 3 prospects, like 2 of them are probably going to be really good players, and if they're lucky, all 3, and it'll be a great core. But I hear a lot of this. Oh well, these guys are going to be really good, and then the Red Sox are going to be this great team like the Astros or like the Dodgers. And I'm not saying you said that. I hear that a lot around the Red Sox, and to me, that's such a false choice. Like the Red Sox have the resources that they can let those guys develop and still trade for Dylan Cease, or let those guys develop and still sign Blake Snell and be really good. Like that's why to people like the Red Sox.
That's the frustrating part.
Well, the Red Sox won 4 World Series this century. They were top 3 in payroll all 4 times. Like even the 07 team that had a young Kevin Youkilis and a young John Lester, they're paying Kurt Schilling and Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz a lot of money too, right? Like 2018, they had Betts and Bogarts and Bradley and Benintendi and all these young guys that they had promoted and they were a great core, they were still paying a lot of money to Chris Sale and David Price. Like they can still do it. They're just choosing not to. And
Exactly.
they've given out one 9-figure free agent contract since they won the 2018 World Series. Trevor Story, only free agent they've given a 9-figure contract to. Now they did give Devers one on a re-sign, but it's like they've made a decision where they just want to wait till all these guys are ready and then they'll spend. Which when that happens,
that's what drives me nuts.
Yeah, and like when that happens, whether it's next year or the year after, it's going to be great because they'll have these guys and then they'll spend. But the Red Sox are not. It's not the Kansas City Royals. Like they don't need to wait and be good twice every 10 years. Like they could be good right now if they really wanted to. And that to me is the thing. And I understand they're not going to be. I'm not asking to be the Mets and spend $300 million on your payroll, but you could spend more than you are. And another piece of this, and last thing I'll say, because I know I'm going on here, I think a piece of being a good GM is knowing, which prospects to keep, but also which ones you can afford to trade. Like Dave Dombrowski had a choice when he went for Chris Sale. Do I trade Moncada or do I trade Benintendi? He traded Moncada, who's been fine in Chicago, but Benintendi helped him win the 2018 World Series. He's a solid piece of that. So that's something that if Breslow's good,
I think Chicago wanted Devers too.
Yeah, like Breslow's good, he'll know the difference, and then they can make moves. Like, because Bloom never made moves like that. Maybe Breslow will. I don't know.
I mean, like, you kind of hit it on the head there where, I think big picture, the future's still bright. Like, it's not like any of this has hindered or made me feel like the future is not, pretty bright. They have 3 very high quality prospects that all have the tools to be great at the next level. And they're all going to be here, within the next 2 years. And past that, there are some guys that are very talented. I think this Yoelan Cespedes prospect, he's very young. I don't even know if he turned 19 yet. He looks like he might be an emerging superstar prospect. That doesn't mean, like, this whole concept that we need to wait for them to be here just makes no sense. Like, why not spend now knowing, if you truly believe in those guys, like they apparently do, and now put it beside the fact that why'd you fire the guy if you're banking on the guy that brought them in to the mix? But if you're waiting for these guys to be good and you're that confident that they're going to be good, why not spend now knowing that you have those cheap guys coming in the mix? That's what drives me absolutely nuts. So it's like, all right, the future's bright, but we could be, without a doubt, like a mid-80s win team if they wanted to be a mid-80s win team. And you could argue that they could be a mid-80s win team without even going over the tax still this year. They got $25 million to work with. Never mind if they did trade Kenley and shaved off some of his salary and reconfigured things. They could absolutely be more aggressive within this, but it probably seems like Sam Kennedy wasn't lying when he said that it's probably going to be lower than last year, which was $225 million budget, which is just ridiculous. So, like, we're conceivably looking at probably a $210 to $220 million budget. That's what it kind of looks like right now. So could they add more pieces? Yes. Am I expecting anything significant like a Montgomery or a Snell or a big trade at this point? No, I'm not expecting it. Could I think it happens? Sure, but at this point, I kind of expect that they'll, maybe they'll add a depth arm and like an Adam Duvall, bringing him back, and maybe they trade Duran for a top pitching prospect or something like that, and they make it kind of obvious that they're shooting for 2025. But just in its totality, it's incredibly frustrating because there's really no excuse of an ownership being conceivably cheap in their commitment to win in 2024.
And a concern that I have, I just want to throw this out there because we kind of brush by the topic, and this is like ultimate worst case scenario, but what happens if you wait for these 3 guys to come up and God forbid they don't pan out?
Yeah. I mean, it's a realistic question. Like,
what if Mayer and Teal, like, what if Mayer is like a low end starter and Teal is like an average catcher?
Because like you could be the Houston Astros, you could be the Red Sox of 2007, or you could be, the Rays that are good and then we'll get to the World Series once every 10 years, but still not win it. Like, or you could be worse. You could be the Pirates who have great prospects every year and they can't make the playoffs.
Right. And they don't turn out and they don't turn into anything. I mean, look at,
Yeah.
I mean, not to, go too much off a tangent, but like, look at Garrett Cole. Garrett Cole was a number 1 prospect, number 1 overall draft pick, and he didn't do anything until he left the Pirates organization because they couldn't develop him into what he has since become since he was traded to Houston and then obviously, gets the big money contract with the Yankees. He's arguably the best pitcher in baseball, right? So like the ultimate worst case scenario, and I don't think this is highly likely. I mean, you're talking about 3 legitimate prospects not panning out, but if you wait and they don't develop as quickly as you think, or they just turn out this like, hey, like these 3 guys aren't guys to build around, well, now you're resetting again. And whereas if you spend a little bit more money, you won't have to rush these guys through the system. You can let them develop properly. And if they're good, awesome. Now it's, you have, kind of like we talk about the NFL, you have high priced talent kind of around a young, cheap, controllable core. And that works in baseball, right? It works in most pro sports. You have the high-priced superstar and, the younger guys that are cost-controlled on team-friendly deals. But then if they don't pan out, you at least have a competitive product on the field that you can then go figure out, okay, like, well, if these guys aren't it, who's the next guy? And, maybe you're only setting yourself back a year or two because you have, very good players that are, putting butts in seats, which I think is another issue. I think the fan base feels as if the product is so poor that, like, I mean, I grew up where I think we all grew up, in an age where, how many years in a row did the Red Sox sell Fenway out? Like, I don't think they've had a sellout at Fenway for the last 2 years, right? So if they can invest and, and bring buzz back to Fenway, even if those guys don't really pan out, at least you've got a quality competitive product on the field while you figure out, okay, like what next young guys are going to come through the system and help us win another title.
Actually, the last sellout at Fenway Park was the Winter Classic, by the way.
That's funny.
Hey, Jared, what's your, I know you haven't got to chime in. What's your overall thoughts on this before we finish up and we'll go to our final segment?
I fucking hate John Henry. I just think he's a cheap owner, and I think he's driving this team into the ground. I get it. They want to wait until their top prospects are ready, but at the same time, you're the Boston Red Sox. You have the means and the will and the money to spend and upgrade this team. Do it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like the future's still bright, and if they spend, like, we get through this year and they suck, but then they spend big next year, like everyone's going to be back to being excited. But like they could have erased the last 4 years if they just spent this offseason and got the team back to just being like a playoff contender. And like even if this team was a wild card team and lost early and just showed signs of life, the overall morale going into 2025 would be so much higher because now they're like, all right, we took a step forward, we have a decent core, and now we have these young guys coming up, and like now the future's bright. So it's just incredibly frustrating, but we'll
imagine how much better they'd be if they just re-signed Nate Eovaldi and Kyle Schwarber. Like even take all the huge moves out of it. Just those, like they wouldn't even pay those 2 guys.
Yeah, in like big picture, like we talk about like what happened last offseason is we all thought that like, maybe it was ownership being cheap, but was it Bloom not willing to spend, and was he personally being cheap? We found out now this offseason that like the reason why these guys left is because, well, they had like $40 million to spend, and they had Eovaldi and Schwarber the year before and Bogarts and all these guys that they needed to re-sign, and they didn't have the budget to do it. And that's the same thing this year. Breslow's trying to work within a budget that's set by ownership, and they're just not committed to winning. But all right, let's wrap this up with our final segment. It's a new segment, so for those listening and those who will be listening, it's called #State Your Take. Basically about 60 seconds, 30, 60 seconds for each of you. Any take, it doesn't even have to be sports related. Doesn't even have to be Boston related if you don't. John, we'll start with you. What's your state your take moment?
Yeah, for me, I'm going to go to tonight. Brad Marchand is playing in his 1,000th career game for the Boston Bruins tonight. And my take is he needs to be talked about among the legends of the Boston Bruins. Now, he's not as good as Bobby Orr. He's not as good as Patrice Bergeron or Zdeno Chara. But that group of Bruins legends, he deserves to be part of it. He's got 900 career points, over 900 career points, 5 seasons of 30 or more goals. It'll probably 6 after this year is done, 128 points in 146 career playoff games. In the 2011 Stanley Cup final, in the 4 games they won, he had 5 goals in those 4 games, including 2 in game 7. And he's ascended from being that kind of rookie rat type player that would get under the opponent's skin all the way up to team captain. And I know he's made mistakes along the way. He's been suspended. They've been deserved. But I think he's at the point when you look at his career, he needs to be talked about among the legends, the same way we talk about the Hall of Famers and the retired numbers of the Boston Bruins, because he's been just as important to their success over the last 15 years as anybody not named Bergeron and Chara, and he deserves to be mentioned among that group of legends.
I love it. Yeah, they were talking about today on the radio of, him versus Krejci. If you had to retire one of the 2 numbers, which would you rather? And I kind of agreed.
Yeah, I'd probably go Marchand, but Krejci
I think
was
at
awesome
this point, I would go Marchand as well. I think he'll inevitably have 63 hung up in the rafters one day. JR, how about you? What's your state the take moment?
I think the Patriots are going to be a playoff team next year. I really do. I think it's a new regime. It's a new how do I word this? It's a new era for the Patriots. It's a new coaching staff. It's a really young coaching staff. They have the money, the means, and the draft capital to do what they want to make this team a playoff team if they truly decide to. If they don't really want to go the rebuild route and retool, you have all the money with the salary cap to spend. You have the 3rd pick in the draft. You can get your franchise quarterback. You can build around him. And who the hell knows? We could have a Houston Texans situation in 2024 with the New England Patriots, depending on who they draft.
I'll tell you just the quick comment on that is crap. Not only does Mayo have something to prove, Elliott Wolf has something to prove, and Robert Kraft, probably more than all three of them combined, have something to prove that he made the right decision. So, I mean, I like it. They're gonna be aggressive this offseason.
Let me finish it off with let Elliott Wolf cook.
All right, Ben. What's yours?
So I'm going to kind of piggyback off of I touched on a little bit earlier. I think the Red Sox are going to be a sub 73 win team this year. I think the division is a lot better than people want to give it credit for. The Orioles have new ownership. Who knows if they're going to be willing to spend. But obviously they made some splashy moves. I just think the pitching staff on this team, it's underwhelming to me, but I think I just don't think they're going to be able to hold really their own. I hope Bayo makes that next step. I think if your pitching staff is essentially, if you're expecting Lucas Giolito to be your ace and be your stopper every 5th game, I think, even in his best years, that's not really his ceiling. Hopefully they get something out of him more so than, the Guardians and the Angels did. I expect the offense to be good, not great. I think there's some development pieces there, but I think the pitching is going to be the team's undoing. I think, 3 out of the 5 guys in the rotation they don't move the needle for me. And call me old school. Pitching and defense is what wins championships in baseball. And you need consistent high level out of both of those things. And I just don't think the Red Sox are there yet. I think they can get there. They're not quite there yet. And then one last thing I'll just slip in is that ketchup does not belong on a hot dog.
All right. Yeah, I mean, they'll, at this very moment, it's tough to see them being a playoff team. That they'll be climbing up there at the best and trying to fight and scrap their way to there. We'll see if they add more to try to, improve their chances. For myself, putting aside the overall potential success of the Red Sox, I'll be a little bit more specific. Cora made his comments today that Yoshida will be a full-time DH or primarily DH. I think you'll probably see him there 75% of the games, maybe even a little bit less, 65, 70%. And he'll mix a little bit in the outfield. And obviously, I think they're going to give him some rest days. But my state your take moment is that Masataka Yoshida will have an OPS plus over 120 this year. I am very high in the concept of him being year number 2 coming from Japan. Not that it's black and white and it's going to follow the same trend, but I saw what Hideki Matsui did in his second year in New York. He took a very solid step forward from his rookie year in the MLB. Yoshida was already a pretty solid hitter last year with a 109 OPS plus. So I'm going with 120, at least 120 OPS plus from Masataka Yoshida. All right. Sounds good to you guys. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited to see him as a DH full time. I think he'll only get better, right? I think defensively he was inconsistent as it was, and he probably had to put in a lot of time working at it. So I'm excited to see him be exclusively a DH this year.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. All right. Yeah. So we're at the 1:30 mark. We're a little bit past what I wanted to, but this is kind of the cap of what we try to keep it at. John, any final words? You want to plug anything? It was great having you on, and we'll be certain to do this again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'd be happy to come on again. You can find me WEEI, New England Football Journal, Sports Map Radio. I kind of bounce around a bunch of different places, so find me on Twitter at @TheRealJon Lyons as well. But pleasure being part of the show, and I'd be happy to come back on again.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. As usual, it's Matt, Ben, and JR here. We'll be back next week. Hopefully we can get back in doing this live consistently. But for now, thanks for listening, and thanks for tuning in.
Have a great night. Thanks, John.
Have a good night. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, guys.